April the 4th, 1988, Spencerville, Indiana. The body of a young girl is found by a jogger.
When the Tinsley case happened, I think it caught a lot of people off guard because that's not something that was seen in Fort Wayne.
April, unfortunately, was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he saw an opportunity and took it.
It soon transpires she's been raped and strangled.
This was purely a crime of opportunity.
It was just an accumulation of a tragic set of events, and now you're hearing it firsthand. It's really, you just can't imagine the evil that are in some people.
Despite an intensive investigation, the case goes cold, but the killer has left some clues.
On the side of the barn written, basically, I killed April Tinsley and I will kill again.
The message was bragging about killing April Tinsley. It had the phrase, ha ha.
The story of the murder of 8-year-old April Tinsley is full of twists and turns and heartbreak for her family.
You're thinking it's never going to get solved because it's 32 years, never imagine it's ever going to come.
But the resolution of the case is the result of extraordinary forensics and the committed work of the Bloodline Detectives.
Using investigative genetic genealogy, we are taking the monsters out of the darkness.
Without the DNA connection, we never would have found him.
Fort Wayne's, I'd say, your standard community, pretty quiet for the most part, very friendly people. I would say we have not a lot of crime. Probably average amount.
You know, this is a really big, small town. The county now is probably just shy of 400,000 people. The main city is Fort Wayne. Pretty diverse, but still it has that very small town feel.
When the Tinsley case happened, I think it caught a lot of people off guard. Because that's not something that was seen in Fort Wayne.
Well, ever since I was 16 years old, I wanted to, kept telling everybody when I got married, my first child, if it was a little girl, it's gonna have blonde hair, blonde curly hair, and blue eyes. And everybody goes, well, she got what she wanted. And I said, yep, that's what I wanted.
April Tinsley was born on March the 18th, 1980.
So April was just your average happy little girl, 8 years old, enjoyed playing with her friends in the neighborhood, and she wasn't the type of child who would have just walked away or run away.
April the 1st, 1988, Good Friday in Fort Wayne, Indiana. April Tinsley, a second grader attending Fairfield Elementary School, is playing with her friends close to West Sutton Field Street on the south side of the city.
That was Good Friday, so therefore they got out what we call a half day. They were out shortly before lunchtime. It was kind of a rainy, dreary day, and April came home and then checked in with her mother and then started playing with friends in the neighborhood. April was playing with those friends. Everything was going well. She was told by her mother to be home around 3 or shortly thereafter, and ultimately never made it home.
Most of the kids in that neighborhood walked to school, so it would not have been unusual for her to walk someplace. It was raining that day. She'd taken an umbrella. She left, I think, about 11:30 in the morning to walk over to her little friend's house, and she was supposed to be back by 3, and she wasn't. Her mother went over to this little friend's house looking for her and found that her umbrella was still there.
They spent several hours looking for April on their own and exhausted all means. And at that point, they realized that, or started to realize something was very wrong. Something was possibly had happened to April, and they contacted law enforcement shortly before 8 p.m.
Once the police are contacted, a full-scale search begins in Fort Wayne.
Panic started coming in and sitting there worrying about where she's at. And her dad come home from work, and I told him.
Her family was very helpful looking for April. They had actually organized a search prior to law enforcement even being called, and they were very concerned. They were very worried.
Originally, it came in as a missing child in Fort Wayne PD. There was a massive search for her.
Not unusual to have maybe a report of a missing child. Usually they're found within minutes.
So the plan at that time was Fort Wayne still had a mounted patrol, horseback patrol, K-9 units, uniform officers, patrol officers began scouring the area, doing a canvass, looking for anybody who may have information, but they contacted local media outlets and they did a media release, and April's picture was shown on the television.
Next day, we were out canvassing the neighborhood again, asking anybody if they had seen anything. Went to the gas stations, asked them if they seen anything. And they kept telling us about a blue pickup truck that's supposed to have been going around the neighborhood. Then all of a sudden that night, started panicking more. Knowing that I had an almost 2 years old child, I said I had to think of him, so I couldn't go completely nuts. But for a couple of days, I just sit in my one chair right by the window, just stare out the window.
3 days later, in Spencerville, a small town located about half an hour northeast of Fort Wayne, a man out jogging makes a horrific discovery.
So April 4th was that call, that day that no one wanted that call.
There was somebody out jogging, and there was a barbed wire fence. So there's the road, then there was like a little ditch, then there was a barbed wire fence. This jogger saw something, and he believed it was a body, so he immediately called police. Police came, and it was indeed a body, and it was April's.
State troopers responded to the scene, detectives and crime scene technicians.
The worst was discovered. They discovered the body of a young girl, believed to be April Tinsley, based on what was happening. And ultimately, April was identified.
We had to go up to the hospital, and we walked in, and it was like you can drop a pin, and you would hear that pin drop. It was so quiet. I wanted my sister to go with me to identify her. And when I turned this way and walked like this and went right in front of her, I was sitting there thinking, everybody, they kept going, is that her? And I was sitting there, that's her.
The police begin a thorough search of the crime scene and start to collect whatever evidence they could.
Anything surrounding there, again, in '88, what we thought might have been evidence may not be considered at that time what we would consider evidence now. But basically her body and her clothing. Her shoe was found further down the road to the west, a short ways, so that was collected as evidence also.
April was in the ditch, and she was clothed, but she was missing one shoe. That shoe was ultimately found on the opposite side of the roadway, approximately 200 feet down. And from what it appears, the body was not hidden. It was not meant to be concealed. It looked like somebody just took April and laid her in that ditch.
In 1988, at the scene, from April's body and her clothing, they were actually able to recover some DNA evidence from the scene.
I don't know that a specific theory was being looked at that point. April was taken to the forensic center where autopsy was conducted, and that's when we learned the manner of death was suffocation by strangulation, and that there were signs of sexual assault.
They tested her clothing for DNA. So they did things like that. There was not a whole lot of evidence at the scene. One of the things they did do, though, is they interviewed anybody that would have been there at the time. There are a few houses in that general area, and I think a mobile home, and they interviewed those folks as well. So there were a lot of interviews going on at the same time.
So known sexual offenders were interviewed. A very thorough canvass was done, knocking on doors in the neighborhood in the area. There were tip lines that were set up. so that call-in tips could take place. Every tip that came in was investigated thoroughly. The crime scene units in 1988 did a phenomenal job. They collected the evidence properly.
Well, that's one of the things is obviously who done this, and then is why this was done, and where was it done? Did the murder occur here? Did it occur somewhere else? Was the body dropped? Or all those things got to be taken into consideration, which in turn is part of the evidence gathering part, because if it didn't happen here, where did it happen? Is there evidence somewhere else that would help us determine the killer? But at that point, they had no idea.
Police now knew they were looking for a child murderer, someone with a ruthless desire to kill. They knew they needed to apprehend them before they struck again. The day of April's funeral, police are on high alert.
We had over 300 people that were out searching for her. They all wanted to come to her funeral service. They were limiting how many people comes in, and they had undercover officers acting like they worked there. Okay, because they told me every now and then the first suspect will want to come in and see their victims and see how they're laying, how they look.
Officers were present in the crowd watching the individuals who showed up for the funeral, and that was just to, one, provide some security for the family, and to observe the crowd to see if anybody in particular stood out to them that they felt that they should try to identify and be looking at as a possible suspect.
They had little kids coming in and giving us stuffed animals. There's one little girl that went to school with her, was in her first grade class, came in and gave me a rabbit and told me she wanted this to be in with April so she can have something to play with.
Police begin to analyze their evidence and interview eyewitnesses to help build their case.
Everybody within a mile of where this occurred, or where she lived, or who could have done it, or was it potentially family? They're just day after day after day just talking to everybody, hoping somebody would come forward with some information, but it was a nonstop effort, though.
There were several calls that came in giving investigators different leads. One of the things that was done was obviously a neighborhood canvass, going to the people that lived on that street or that county road and just interviewing them to see if they saw anything. And then people were calling in, and one of the tips that came in said something about a little girl getting into a blue vehicle.
There was information that a child matching April's description was seen getting into a blue pickup truck, and they gave a rough sketch of a scruffy male white, and that tip was acted on and checked out very thoroughly. We have Rubbermaid tubs full of Bureau Motor Vehicle registrations from Indiana, Ohio, Michigan for blue trucks.
Several people that called in gave descriptions, and from those descriptions, they actually came up with a sketch of what the person possibly looked like.
All of a sudden, it popped up on the news that the suspect that they're looking for is a 6-foot, blonde hair, blonde mustache, muscular-built dude.
The sketch was put out. When people look at sketches, they sometimes look too deeply into it. You know, it could look like so-and-so, it could look like this person, but this part of the sketch doesn't look like him, so I won't say nothing. So you gotta be careful with sketches, because making a sketch from someone's memory, sometimes it's not always real accurate, but we're hoping to at least bring a lead. We'd rather have 1,000 leads that you want nowhere than no leads at all.
There were so many people that gave tips. There were so many people that were questioned. There were so many people that were given polygraphs and lie detector tests and gave their DNA. There was an immense amount of work that went into this case.
I think at one time we were up to almost 900 people on a suspect list, and we did use different ways to, eliminate people off of that. Most of the time what we did was, if we thought we had a good suspect or a good tip, and somebody matched the profile of what we were looking for, we'd go out and talk to them and do an interview with them and then ask them for a buccal swab or a DNA sample.
To further their investigation, local police and sheriff's departments started to work with the FBI and other organizations.
So in 1988, and even moving forward into the 90s and 2000s, the DeKalb County Sheriff's Department, Auburn Police Department, Indiana State Police, the FBI, NCMEC, the U.S. Marshals, and Fort Wayne Police Department worked this investigation. This case, for being a cold case, was actively being worked for 30 years.
With the case seemingly going cold, in July 1990, April's killer appears to reveal himself with a cryptic message written at an abandoned barn.
So the barn is located on Schwartz Road in northern Allen County. Sat in a pretty remote area, wasn't a lot of houses around it. On the side of the barn written, basically, I killed April Tinsley and I will kill again.
So the message on the barn was discovered, and basically the message was bragging about killing April Tinsley. It had the phrase, "ha ha," and what really stuck out to investigators and really set off the alarm bells was the phrase about the shoe. Did you find the shoe? Prior to the barn writing, there was no mention by law enforcement to the media or to the community about the shoe being discovered on the opposite side of the road, approximately 200 feet down. That in law enforcement was a piece of evidence that was being held very close in, so that if a tip came in talking about the shoe, it would show that this was a very high priority tip, because only somebody who was present at the scene or the perpetrator of this would know that that shoe was discovered or discarded on the opposite side of the road 200 feet down.
It was scary, and there was still a little bit of, is this the person that killed April, or is this someone just playing a horrible, awful joke?
It can be scary to a lot of people, but as a police officer, to us, that's the good news, because now we have a lead. It may not go anywhere, we have a lead. It may be the suspect, it may not be.
What was scary about it was the fact that it was attention-getting. That and what followed were clearly attention-getting. It was all about, I did it, and if you don't call the police, and if it doesn't appear in the media, I'm going to come back and kill your family, and you will be mine.
The FBI did a handwriting analysis on the writing on the barn. There were some questions about it, whether it was written that way purposely to try to throw off police or not being able to identify who wrote it.
I guess I would describe it as almost like childlike language and the misspellings that you would have of a child who was trying to write bigger words than they knew how to spell, and so they were kind of sounding them out.
The way they talked about it, first thing that came to my mind was a copycat. I said, there is somebody out there wanted a 15 minutes of fame.
It'd be devastating to be the parent of April Tinsley and find out that this individual is still in the community, or at least makes trips to the community, and left a taunting message on a barn, bragging and laughing about the death of their daughter.
The FBI came and did a couple of different things for us. They did some analysis of what personality of the crime would have been like. They compared April Tinsley's death to the death of another little girl in this community that happened 2 years later. There were more differences than there were similarities, because I believe the original concern was that we might have had a serial killer. But the differences in those two homicides meant to the FBI profilers that they were probably committed by different people.
After the writings on the barn, once again the case goes cold. With more and more time passing, investigators begin to wonder if the killer got away or perhaps maybe dead.
I think that there was time that we thought maybe this individual did the barn riding because it was like a deathbed confession. They didn't have the nerve to come forward. Or maybe that was a last-ditch thing and then they took their own life. But in 2004, we realized our suspect was alive, was well, and was moving through our community and had to be stopped.
The year is 2004, and our killer appears once again.
So in 2004, the answer to the question of whether our suspect was still alive or deceased became very clear to us. Over the span of approximately 3.5 months, 4 letters were discovered. There was a letter in all 4 occasions. There were used condoms left, and there was a photograph of a male white laying on a bedspread with his lower region exposed, his genitals exposed. And these letters were taunting. They were bragging about killing April Tinsley. They were saying that they were going to kill additional children.
Obviously, the children had been watched. The person that left the notes knew that young girls lived at these houses, and the notes were very alarming. The person that left the notes identified themselves as the person that killed April Tinsley, referred to the girls as Hi Honey, and said in the notes that he'd been watching them.
They're scary because they threaten specific action to a specific person with an intent to harm children.
It was scary to the police. However, again, it's impossible. We have somebody to go on now. Now we have something to chase. I thought he was reaching out for publicity, and we really didn't know whether it was really the killer or not. We didn't know was somebody just trying to claim and get some credit for doing something.
They claimed that they would blow up homes of families with children.
My take on that was, one, if you're going to do something like that, you're not going to broadcast it. You're not going to give them notice that you're going to do this. 2, somebody as a sexual predator and blowing something up, in my opinion, that's 2 separate people.
All of these homes were highly traveled areas. The bicycles were right between the house and the street. If you live in a city street, from the street to your front door, maybe 25, 30 feet, this person was brazen. They were stalking our neighborhoods. They were stalking the Fort Wayne community, and it was a slap in the face. And it let us know that we knew this man was a monster, but we had no idea of what a monster he was.
Shock, I guess, that somebody would leave something like that on a little girl's bike is disturbing. It sparked concern in the community, obviously, because this person is still out there. He's obviously still watching children. He's threatening to kill again. The question is he going to make good on it?
Although what was left on the children's bicycles was disturbing, police were optimistic about obtaining more DNA evidence. Putting this evidence to practice wouldn't come for a number of years.
It was determined that the semen left in the condoms with the notes on the bike was the same as the DNA collected off of April's body.
I think what led me and got me through some of those days of like, oh my gosh, this is just overwhelming, this is horrible, it's disgusting, bad days, was we're gonna get this guy.
It's very frustrating to think that you may never solve this case, and not just for April, but for the family who's still not knowing exactly what happened to their daughter and, who did this to her.
Having a match on the DNA of April's killer and the man that left the notes and the condoms was a good step in the case. However, it was only when Parabon Nano Labs became involved when police had a clear direction to go in.
2014, we had contact with Parabon, and at that time, we were still following up leads. We had a group of detectives that met once a month and talked about April's case and what we were going to be doing that month to eliminate suspects or what we were working on. And when Parabon came about, it was a new company. We didn't know much about it, and with a cold case like this that's almost 30 years old at that time, you figure why not?
Prior to my joining Parabon to create the genetic genealogy service for law enforcement, they already had a relationship with Fort Wayne Police Department because they had already worked with them to create a snapshot phenotype. And that is where you use the DNA from the unknown crime scene in order to try to predict what somebody looks like.
When we had the phenotyping picture, the snapshot photo, I thought it was huge. And I didn't even care what the photo looked like. What I was so keyed in on was eye color and hair color, because that allowed me to work through my suspect list and kind of prioritize. I could prioritize the people who had the eye color and hair color of our suspect.
It really is a game changer. What had happened was it had been used in California.
In 2018, when the Golden State Killer case broke, I started working with a state trooper named Clint Hetrick, who was a detective for the Indiana State Police. On May 11th of 2018, I received an email from Parabon Nanolabs. And the email told me that they had a new technique that was being put out to law enforcement, and they believed that the Tinsley case would be a good case to use this technology. And that technology was described to me to be investigative genetic genealogy.
When he contacted these folks at Parabon, it was a total game changer, because without that, we never would have solved this crime. This man had hidden in plain sight ever since 1988. He'd never moved.
Using the DNA profiling, scientists then cross-reference search with the DNA library to narrow down a family or relation of the killer.
Really, I just had the crime scene DNA, and I needed to identify the people that were sharing DNA with April's killer, build their trees, and try to find patterns, overlaps, consistencies in those trees, and then identify common ancestors. Then build those common ancestors' descendants toward the present and try to find who in the world would be related to all of these top matches. So the people that were sharing the most significant amounts of DNA with April's killer, if I could figure out how all of those pieces fit together, how all of those people at the top of the list could fit into one person's family tree, then I would know who the killer was.
I talked to CC Moore several days after the sample is given. CC starts telling me that she's getting strong triangulation on the case. Triangulation ultimately meant we were getting hits on the mother and the father's side of our sample, which is good because then she can start building the family tree out. You know, we'd been on a lot of roller coaster rides with this case, so I felt we were on a high point, and then I was like trying to prepare myself for the bottom to drop out. CC says one afternoon, I need you to see if you can give me a call.
So Detective Martin and I are sitting in an office with our bosses. There's just 4 of us in there. And CC sends us a presentation that she had put together.
In this case, we didn't have any really strong matches. Our top match looked like it might be a third cousin, but the good news is we had a lot of supporting matches. So we had quite a number of matches that were around third cousins.
CC said, you know, Brian, we've been talking a lot. We had some strong triangulation. We went from thinking second cousin twice removed to possibly a great-grandparent. She goes, but I have to tell you, we were not able to do that. And I think all of us just kind of looked at each other and just like, there it is, there's the bottom dropping out again. You know, we were climbing, we felt so optimistic, and then just to have our legs kicked out from under us again.
I was able to build 4 different sets of matches, or genetic networks is what I call them. And then I knew that the suspect had to descend from all 4 of those sets of common ancestors for each of the genetic networks. When you have that much data to work with, it allows you to really narrow down to very few people. And it allowed me to narrow to just one immediate family who had 3 sons.
She paused for several seconds and she goes, but I got it narrowed down between 2 brothers. And I think we all had some choice words that we blurted out.
That was I get goosebumps as we're talking about it. It's just, I can't explain the enormous feeling you have thinking, oh my gosh, we may be having something here, you know.
At that point, my genetic genealogy work stops. I can't tell the difference between two full brothers because they have the exact family tree. So through genetic genealogy, once you get to that set of siblings, my work is done, and law enforcement then has to determine which of those brothers is the suspect.
Our very next question, I think we all said at the same time, are they alive? And she said, yes, they're both alive. She goes, I cannot tell you which brother it is, but it's narrowed down between two brothers. She said there were actually three brothers, but one was deceased and is excluded because of the timing with the letters and when that individual passed away. Clint Hetrick and I began digging into the computer database. We realized that one brother, being John Miller, had some involvements in 2002, 2003, where he was making rude, inappropriate comments to women and children in the parking lots of a grocery store. And we felt that this was the kind of activity that we thought somebody like this would do. Taunting letters, message on a barn, a predator.
One of the things we actually did was pulled his driver's license signature. And we noticed that his signature was very similar to the writing on the notes and to the writing on the barn.
So we focused our attention on John Miller and set up surveillance within about an hour of the phone call with C.C. Moore. And we had two other detectives begin surveillance on the other individual, his brother.
When you're able to connect the family trees of the matches to a person of interest, mother's and father's side, and multiple grandparent lines, I feel very confident at that point because I know that there's very unlikely to be anyone else in the whole world that has that same set of unique ancestors.
With the massive success of the DNA genealogy work, it was now up to investigators to obtain hard, matching DNA evidence from the suspect, John Miller, before it was too late. Fort Wayne, Indiana, 2018. Police are investigating the murder of 8-year-old girl April Tinsley that happened back in 1988. Having just gained hard DNA evidence through the incredible work of C.C. Moore and Parabon Nanolabs, police now have a #1 suspect to chase, John Miller.
They had a plan, and their plan worked. They wanted to surveil him, figure out where he worked, what he did every day.
John Miller lived in a trailer home in Grable, Indiana, and he was working at a Walmart supermarket in Kendallville, Indiana, which was approximately 20 minutes from his home. We learned that John lived alone. The first time we saw John, we were kind of in disbelief because he walked out of the trailer and went to get in his vehicle, and he was walking like a broken old man. What was very concerning to us, from the front door of John's trailer to a public baseball and softball diamond and park where children played, was about 200 feet.
In Indiana, once you put your trash out to be picked up, legally it's abandoned property.
The detectives picked up the trash, brought it to a location in Fort Wayne where at the time I was a crime scene investigator. I went through his trash looking for anything that might have his DNA on it. Initially, I started going through the first bag of trash and I found a pop can. I was excited, oh, we got a pop can. As I continued to dig through this dirty bag of trash, I found a used condom. I was elated. I was probably yelling and carrying on, and people look at me funny because I was excited over finding a used condom. But it was, to me, it was, this is it.
I was surprised, didn't expect to find that in there, and it was almost creepy that the thing that he left on a girl's bike with a note was going to be the thing that we used to get his DNA.
We found out 3 days later that the DNA that we took from the condoms that were in John Miller's trash was consistent and identified him and positively identified him as the individual who left the used condoms and the letters in 2004, as well as left the DNA evidence on April's body and April's clothing back in 1988, and we knew we had our killer.
After over 30 years of searching, police and detectives now have confirmed John Miller as the murderer of April Tinsley. Now they take him in and ask the question, why?
It was decided that Detective Martin and I were going to approach John Miller at his residence when he got home from work from Walmart. And I believe it was about 7 o'clock in the morning. He pulled up in front of his trailer, and Brian and I were waiting across the street, and we just approached him as he was getting out of his car.
We introduced ourselves, and we told John that we needed his help, and we would like him to come with us so that we could talk to him. John rode with us. John never once asked us what we needed his help with. Once we were at the police station, we took John up to an interview room. He was advised of his rights.
I was there, my chief deputy was there, the prosecutor from DeKalb County, and we all sat and watched the interview. I could hardly breathe.
I asked John if he had any idea what he thought I wanted to talk to him about. And John looked at me and he said, Tinsley. The hairs on my neck stood up. I wanted to jump out of my chair, but I knew that I had to remain very emotionless and calm. And I said, we really need to talk about this. And I was able to get John to tell me the details of the abduction of April Tinsley.
It really wasn't an interrogation. It was more of a interview. They asked him a question and he would answer it without hesitation. He didn't seem to be hiding anything at this point.
John stated that he drove the neighborhoods of Fort Wayne all the time looking for a child to take. And on this particular day, he was down around April's neighborhood and he had made his mind up that he was going to take a child. He didn't specifically stalk April. She was a target of opportunity for John. John stated that he was in his blue Mercury Lynx, not a pickup truck. It's like a small Ford Escort. He said that he saw April walking. She was walking alone. He passed her. He pulled about a block to 2 blocks up in front of her, pulled his car to the curb, got out of his vehicle, was standing next to his vehicle. He had a letter opener that looked like a knife. He said he approached April, said, get in my car, and he got April into the car. And he said that he would not hurt her if she did what he asked her to do. John stated that he then drove her to his trailer in Grable, Indiana, where he assaulted her and then ultimately killed her.
Police tried to see if he was in any way sorry for what had happened.
No signs of remorse. His demeanor throughout the interview was pretty well the same throughout the whole thing, and didn't know what to think. I think there was some relief, the fact that we finally knew what happened. We had a confession. The case was going to be closed. April's family was going to know what happened to her. And then the fact that we were going to be able to put this guy behind bars for the rest of his life.
And we looked out the window and I seen a white SUV, then a black SUV, and another black SUV. There was 4 of them. Come in, stand there, and they go, we got a picture we want to show you. They go, have you ever seen him around the neighborhood, talk to anybody? And I'm sitting there like, nope. And they go, well, we got some more news. We arrested him this morning. And it's like, you're standing here and it's like it just went over your head.
On one hand, it's a relief. Okay, we know what happened. Okay, we know what happened now. We got this 30-year run is over with. But on the other hand, it's so sad to hear it.
You're thinking it's never gonna get solved because it's 32 years. It's like, never imagine it's ever gonna come.
It was just an accumulation of a tragic set of events, and now you're hearing it firsthand. It's really, you just can't imagine the evil that are in some people.
He said he would drive around and just watch people, and I don't think he was ever had the opportunity, unfortunately, like with April, to take another little girl. I think given the opportunity, he would have, but April, unfortunately, was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he saw an opportunity and took it.
John had made his mind up on that April 1st that he was going out hunting and he was going to take a child and abduct them. He was going to sexually assault them. Whether he was going to kill them or let them go, I believe John knew all along that he was going to kill them because he didn't want to be found out.
And what I thought was particularly troubling in his own bizarre mind is that the note on the barn and the 4 notes from 2004, he did that because nobody was paying attention to him anymore.
I felt that John was disgusting. To tell you what I wanted to have happen to John, I would never say publicly, but John's a monster.
Detective Martin and I were working on this case still after the confession, getting everything wrapped up that we needed to, and the prosecutor's office wasn't too long afterwards told us that he was going to plead guilty and accept a plea deal.
When they had him, and then when we had to go to court, when I walked in there, I was in the front row, and when he come in, he wouldn't look up at none of us. He looked at the table.
I know how I feel about the death penalty, but to me it was entirely in the family's hands what they felt should happen.
When they told me that he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison without the possibility of parole, I was fine with that.
I mean, this sounds horrible, but I've been doing this for 41 years. I'd pull the switch. I'd pull a switch tomorrow, and I wouldn't have one bad thought about doing it, not one.
With April's killer now sentenced to 40 years in prison, detectives reflect on how vital the use of DNA genealogy was to solving this case.
It was absolutely huge. Using investigative genetic genealogy, we are taking the monsters out of the darkness. We're taking people who are hiding in plain sight, who think they've gotten away with horrendous crimes, and we're making them accountable, and we're making them pay for what they've done.
When I tell you he was hiding in plain sight, he really was. He worked, lived in the same place. Without the DNA connection, we never would have found him.
After 32 years, the hope is that everyone involved can move on and make sure April's memory lives on.
I don't know if there's justice. There's not closure. I don't believe in the word closure. I don't know as a parent how you can bury your child after being taken in such a violent, senseless way. I don't know that we can ever understand that.
Every year, Detective Martin and I would attend a memorial service at April's Garden. April's Garden is located here in Fort Wayne. It's just a nice memorial to her.
I'll sit there and talk to her and tell her that Mama's here. And then all of a sudden, if you be sitting there, and all of a sudden here comes a white butterfly. And it'll fly around and it'll come about right in front of me and it'll sit there and flap its wings. And everybody keeps telling me that that's April. They named that butterfly April.